Hi there and welcome to Bike File with me, Wazza, the show that tells you all about the best bikes on the market. Now in today's episode we're looking at bikes that have started life as motocrossers but have metamorphosised into something a little more mental. Yes, it's Supermoto time. And in tonight's show, Louise is going to be out on MZ's Baghira, Rod will be out on a KTM 640 Duke, and I am going to be playing about with Suzuki's DRZ400 and Honda's XR650. Supermotos are the next big thing in motorcycling. After all, these are bikes that are still mad enough that they're going to let us get our kicks, but they're not so fast that they're going to mean we lose our licences. However, I'm not entirely convinced with the argument. Call me a cynic if you like, but I reckon that for the last 15 years I've been reading this sort of thing, and over the last few years I've ridden plenty of them as well. But we've got a brace of them lined up for this show and we're going to see how they stack up. And where better to start than here, Honda's XR650. Now, you can't go into the shops and just buy one of these as it stands here. You've got to go down the Supermoto route. So, start with a serious enduro bike, which the XR is, then go to town, trick it up so it's going to handle some road and possibly track action as well. So you're going to want road tyres, firm up the suspension a little bit, get some nice lightweight spoke wheels in there, and you're ready to go to town. However, just remember, this is still a very pared down motorcycle. Look at it. No indicators, no mirrors, that headlight's not much cop either, and don't think this seat's comfortable for 1 minute. You better be good at exercise too, because it's got a kickstart only. This is a proper hardcore motorcycle. You'll have to get friendly with the kickstart if you fancy an XR as well, because there is a certain knack to getting it going, and if you're not au fait with kicking over big singles, it may take you a while to get used to it. Put simply, you've got an enormous piston in there with plenty of weight and plenty of compression, which means there's a lot of leverage needed to actually kick it into life. But when it does finally come on song, you will be rewarded with one of the baddest sounding bikes anywhere. Now, just because the XR's motor hasn't been highly tuned and fettled, do not be fooled for a minute, because this 650cc single lump in here is still a very serious piece of kit. What this means is this bike pulls so hard off the bottom end and so instantly off the throttle, you can really get a move on and mess about just as hard as you want to. There's plenty of mid-range to back it up too. But the problem you've got with all this is if you want to take it easy on this bike, it ain't really going to play ball. Through town, that throttle snatches on and off and you lurch about on the thing. It's not an easy bike to ride slow. Ride it hard, however, and you'll see the rewards. The chassis on this bike is standard as it comes from Honda, although both ends have been firmed up a little bit. But you still get an awful lot of dive on the brakes, particularly because there's more power up there. Although this isn't actually such a problem, and if you ride the bike the way it's supposed to be ridden, i.e. charging into corners, hard on the brakes, back end going a bit light, throwing it over, blasting out the other side, it all works perfectly. So if you know your dirt bikes, or you've already had a few Supermotos, you know you've got a load of twisty back roads to play with, or maybe some track days to go to, and you now want a serious full-on tool, then this could well be the answer. And if you know what you're doing, you can ride it hard, you're really going to have a lot of fun on this motorcycle. However, if you just fancy dipping a toe in the Supermoto waters for the first time, this really ain't the place to start. What you're probably going to find if that's your case is that it's just going to be uncomfortable, overblown, impractical. You're going to hate every minute of it. You'd be better off starting off with something that we're going to look at later, which is Suzuki's DRZ. Anyway, staying with the XR, let's see how the scores stack up.
Performance, 5 out of 10. This will be either the best bike in the world for you or the worst bike in the world for you. If you're into Supermotos and you like to ride them hard, then this will be the absolute ticket. However, if you're not and you just want to try them out, it's a little too much. Styling, 7 out of 10. Looks very cool indeed, although you always seem to look a little awkward perched on top of it. Reliability, 8 out of 10. First of all, it's a Honda, second of all, it's a big simple single, and third of all, being destined for off-road use, this bike is pretty bomb-proof. Comfort, 2 out of 10. Not really a good place to spend any length of time. Value for money, 5 out of 10. It's a bit like the performance, this one. If this is the kind of bike for you, then you're going to absolutely love it and the money won't be an issue. However, it could be a costly mistake unless you've really thought about it.
Well, that was Honda's barking XR650, but if you fancy your Supermoto ready-made, let's go over to Louise, who's testing MZ's Baghira.
Now, as many of us know, The latest trend in motorcycling out there of late is Supermoto. Those agile, lightweight, on-off-road bikes that, let's face it, aren't very often taken off-road, but it sounds good anyway. Now MZ have come up with this one. It's called the Baghira, and Bikeval have managed to get their hands on it over the next few hours. The Black Panther, as this model is aptly named, is powered by Yamaha's liquid-cooled 660cc single engine. The Baghira pumps out a pretty decent 57 Nm of torque, which makes it ideal for that urban environment. Now, in spite of the fact that the MZ has been labelled a super motard, you really can't compare it to the Huskies and the KTMs of this world. Whilst the power plant may match up to the competition in terms of horsepower, our MZ weighs in at some 25 kilos more. When you stick it next to the latest generation of enduro-derived road bikes, it makes the MZ look positively obese. And while we're ripping the bike to pieces, you may not want to feast your eyes on this rather ugly-looking exhaust that looks as if it's been donated from a Ford Sierra. There's just something not quite right about the proportions of this bike. It's got an overly large front mudguard. The engine looks bulky and old school. But there is a couple of advantages, and one of them is, the shorter riders will be pleased to know, when you sling your leg over, you can quite easily touch the floor to give you more stability at those traffic lights. Also, there's the price to take into consideration. At $3,999, this bike may not have the latest cutting-edge technology, but it is reasonably priced and a fair bit of bike for your money. Sling a leg over the thing, fire up that old Yamaha single, and the experience becomes quite pleasurable, especially the sound. The bike feels lighter than its 180 kilos would have you believe, and the steering feels sharp, allowing you to change direction with speed and precision. Mid-corner, the bike feels stable and superbly forgiving, but they do seem to have made a fairly good job of stiffening up the suspension enough for the road, whilst retaining a soft ride and enough suspension travel to cope with most terrain situations. The brakes feel adequate, only there does seem to be a fair amount of dive under hard braking. But you soon get used to this, and once the adjustment has been made, you find that you can brake hard without the fear of running out of suspension or being buried deep into the tarmac. Now, if you've never ridden a Supermoto, then you don't know what you're missing. They're big, hearty, fun bikes, they're comfortable, and they'll stand a lot of hammer. You know, even motorcycle couriers have been buying them and using them to ride all day around the streets of London. So what does that tell you? But right now, it's time to check out how the MZ measures up with our scores on the doors. Let's look at performance. Well, I think the MZ deserves 7 out of 10. Whilst Yamaha's 660 single may be long in the tooth now, it's still impressive with bags of torque, hauling the MZ out of corners with an urgency often associated with middleweight sports bikes. Don't ever think about doing anything over 90 mph though. Strictly for urban and B-road users only. Comfort. Well, only earning 6 out of 10 I'm afraid. But let's face it, this bike ain't built for comfort. Being a single, the bike is naturally skinny and the seat follows suit. Having said that, the riding position is actually a good one, with a pleasant reach to the bars and comfortable footrest. Build quality, 5 out of 10. Whilst we have been impressed by the motor, the cycle parts, that's the wheels, brakes, switchgear, etc., look a little third world, and only time would tell whether or not these bikes will hold together. Can't really say I've seen too many 2-year-old MZs on the road. Value for money, 7 out of 10. The Baghira is the budget and less extreme version of a Husky or KTM, and whilst it may seem cheap, I'm not convinced by the quality. Personally, I'd rather save up and buy a proper motard. Perhaps the older generations will go more for the MZ, thinking they're reliving their youth. Street cred, 5 out of 10. You see, the problem with super motards is that non-bike people think they're rubbish. And to be fair, a bike person won't be that impressed by an MZ either. But if you do want to earn some respect, a lesson at wheelie school may come in handy. And that's all from me and the Black Panther. It's now time to head back to Wazza.
So now we've seen MZ's Baghira and Honda's XR650, and out of the two I would have to take the Honda simply because it is so manic. Here's Rod with the KTM LC4.
If you thought KTM 640 Duke was a pretty radical bike, the LC4 may surprise you too. Developed straight from the Paris-Dakar factory enduro bikes, the LC4 range includes several variants, some of which even come with pillion footrests in a pretense at accommodating a passenger. But make no mistake, the LC4 is a pure off-roader and much more at home on a track. Buying one for serious road use will instantly brand you as a nutter, and quite deservedly so. Nice as the LC4 is, I have to say that this is not really my kind of bike. My own version of weekend hooliganism usually involves drinking too much in a muddy field rather than pulling wheelies up the high street. But if you are bristling with excess testosterone and have a hankering to drift sideways around bends on the way to the shops, take a look at this bike, you might just like it. And now to the scores on the doors. The handling takes a bit of getting used to if you've only ridden road bikes, but once you get the feel of it, the bike is responsive enough to let you explore the edge of the envelope if you have the bottle. Wheelies and stoppies galore for the brave. 7 for performance. Comfort-wise, forget it. This is not a bike to sit on and cruise. In fact, it's barely a bike to sit on at all. The seat is there to give you somewhere to pause on the rare occasions you have both wheels on the ground, and affords the comfort of a plank edge. 1 out of 10 for comfort. So is it reliable? Well, it does look well built and it should be durable enough, but I have a horrible suspicion that crash damage may get to these bikes before entropy has had a chance. I'll guess at 7 out of 10 for reliability. And street cred? Those in the know will spot this bike as a serious contender rather than just another trailie. But it lacks the aggressive street style of the same factory's 640 Duke, and has an entry-level feel about it that mutes the effect. On the other hand, it's an obvious nutter tool, so on balance I'll give it 5 out of 10 for street cred.
Well, I'm afraid that's the end of part 1, but please join us again in part 2 when we're going to be back with a load more Supermoto fun and frolics. Welcome back to part 2 of Bike File. Now, coming up later in the show, Louise is going to have all the Supermoto buying tips you could want, and I'm going to be out on a DRZ400. But before that, here's Rod with KTM's Duke.
We get some pretty mad bikes on Bike File, but this has to be one of the maddest yet. Supermotos are track bikes, and quite why anyone would want to ride one of these bikes on public roads is slightly beyond me. But hey, people do. And this KTM 640 Duke is one of the most popular. So here I go to see if I can make any sense of this strange phenomenon we call Supermoto. The Supermoto craze started when some wag decided to bolt little fat road wheels into a motocrosser a few years back, and then found the resulting beastie could be drifted sideways in bends and ridden in a thoroughly hooligan manner. 1 or 2 manufacturers picked up the ball and ran with it, and the 640 Duke has been setting the pace since it was launched on an unsuspecting world back in '94. Be prepared to have a relationship with your KTM. This 625cc single-cylinder engine has an electric starter, which is just as well because the kickstart is on the wrong side. And when you do get the engine started, you've got 50 brake horsepower available in a bike that weighs only 145 kilograms. Mad and madder. This bike is the original urban terrorist for wheelie and stoppie kings and isn't the slightest bit practical. Thank God then that some manufacturers are still prepared to build such antisocial devices and sell them as road legal. The Duke really is a top adrenaline pumping wheeze. If only I was 10 years younger and 2 stone lighter, maybe I could discover wheelie heaven too. I can see why people enjoy bikes like this, but it really isn't my cup of oysters. It's lots of fun, sure, but the fun is compulsory and unrelenting, and I've just been hanging on for dear life far too much to enjoy the ride. Buy one of these and you certainly won't have a dull time. So let's see how it scores. For performance, I'm going to give this bike 9 out of 10. It's a gut-wrenching, adrenaline-fueled bowline that encourages you to live on the edge. For comfort, forget it. The seat is as comfortable as a plank edgeways up. But if you're sitting down on this bike, you're missing the point. This bike is not for softies who wish to rest their arse. 1 out of 10 for comfort. Street cred is another matter. People in the know will swoon as you pass and gaze in awe at your two-wheeled prowess. Those not in the know will think you're slightly mad and riding a slightly mad bike. Both will be correct. 8 out of 10 for street cred. Reliability? Well, I think it's a little too early to tell yet, as in my experience most of these bikes get crashed long before anything has a chance to wear out. Buy one and prove me wrong. A tentative 6 out of 10 for build quality.
I'll get the hang of this yet. And now, here's Wazza. Whoa!
So if any of the bikes in the show so far are taking your fancy, here's Louise with our Supermoto buying guide.
Now, if you want something to keep you warm this winter, then look no further than a Supermoto. Supermotos are off-road style bikes with road tyres. You can hurtle through traffic on them, sling them through bends, and then take them off-road for even more grin-inducing winter fun.
Supermotos has become really popular with a lot of sports bike riders. This area has been over-policed with sports bikes, and you tend to find that a lot of people want less insurance but have as much fun as they can on a bike, and we've had a lot of sports bike riders trotting from sort of super bikes down to Supermoto.
If you like bikes with that rugged, traily, enduro kind of look, then you should like these. They are generally tall, slim and elegant looking, but once you've ridden one, you won't care what it looks like. These pokey big singles just want to go out and have fun, and wheelies are a fairly commonplace. These bikes are not about top speed, but they are about powering through corners, getting it sideways and loving every minute of it.
Well, absolute top speed is only probably just tops at 100 mile an hour, but it's actual dynamics of the machine, the handling, relative low speed handling, braking and accelerating that the score, and like a rally car from point to point, short distance is very fast.
You can dash through traffic on them due to that tall sleeve and slim build. They are ideal traffic busters. And you can go off-road on them, and you can thrash them and keep your licence. So in that sense, they are practical. But if you want to go to Moscow on it, forget it. Your bum will never survive the experience.
Reasonably practical. You'll get you around as a commuter. You won't want to go any long distance on them because the seats and the riding style is based on a competition motocross bike, but more of a fun bike really than a practical bike to own.
Supermotos are crazy bikes that have to be ridden to be believed. They are two bikes in one, off-road and on-road. Bit of a bargain really. Supermoto racing is on route as well, so if you're brave enough to give it a whirl, then go for it.
And now for our final instalment of Supermoto Madness, I'd love to say we're riding this here delectable Vertimati factory racer, but sadly it's not registered for the road. What we do have, however, is perhaps the next best thing in the shape of this here DRZ400.
The bike that this Supermoto is made out of is Suzuki's DRZ400, which is quite simply an off-roading legend. As far as out-of-the-crate enduro bikes go, this one is very good indeed.
But that's the standard DRZ, and in order to turn it into this here Supermoto version, there are a few changes that need to be done first. First of all, the obvious cosmetics like the rather good looking shorter mudguard up here and the fairly interesting paint job. As well as that, there's a load of carbon add-ons just for extra trickness. Now, down at the front here, we've also got braking discs which are going to give you a stack more power, and the forks have been firmed up a little inside to handle it. Also, there are these Talon hubs and lightweight rims. Not only do they look trick as you like, but they also make the steering a bit lighter, and with those big chunky Renthal bars up top, mean you can really chuck this bike around.
Something else that's been worked over on this DRZ is the motor. Not only is there a full titanium race system on there, which, although being ever so slightly illegal, doesn't sound too offensive but does pep things up nicely. There's also a K&N air filter in there, and the standard carb has been jetted to suit.
And as you can hear, all the mods inside this motor, they're not loads of them, but they do make this bike sound a lot fruitier than a standard DRZ would. They also mean it rides a lot fruitier as well. The gearbox is nice and slick, there's plenty of low down with a good belt and mid-range as well, and even though this bike hasn't got loads of power, because it's so light, you can kick about through the gears, have an absolute gas. As well as that, should you fancy it, you can do lots and lots of wheelies.
And riding this spec'd up DRZ is very, very much fun indeed. It's a very easy going motorcycle, unlike the XR650. So if you're just pottering around in town, there's still plenty of smooth power, and it doesn't seesaw about too much. You can nip in and out of gaps, you can feel very at home straight away. Although the only criticism I would have is that those brakes are a little too sharp, particularly if you're not used to something like this, because just a little sniff of front, or particularly of the back, can have them really locking up pretty quick. but then again, it's always nice to have plenty of power, and you can certainly get the suspension fettled to suit your own needs.
So there you have it, the DRZ400 Supermoto. Now at £7 for this all in, it's still a lot of money for a bike that is so narrowly focused. That said, as far as Supermotos go, this one is actually fairly practical. And also, being based around a very well proven Suzuki thumper design, it's also going to be pretty reliable too. And the best thing is, it is a lot of fun. So let's see how it does in the scores.
Performance, 7 out of 10. Ultimately a bit limited if you wanted to go for motorway cruising, but in terms of either having an absolute giggle going mad down your favourite quiet roads, or pottering about through town and getting used to this Supermoto thing, the DRZ kit can do it all. Styling, 6 out of 10. Could be a little higher because it does look fairly brutal, fairly cool, but I've got to say I'm really not swung on that paint job. Reliability, 9 out of 10. This motor is nearly as old as the hills, or at least its origins are, and being built for the off-road, it is very sturdy indeed. Comfort, 3 out of 10. Passable, but that's about it. Value for money, 5 out of 10. You're still looking at spending somewhere in the region of £7,000 for a motorbike that, no matter how much fun it is, isn't going to be very useful a lot of the time. So if you've got the cash, go ahead, dig out and enjoy yourself. If you haven't, I'd look around at what else is out there before plumping for one of these.
Well, I'm afraid that's it for Supermotos from sunny Bradford, but please do join us again next week when we're going to be getting down and dirty with a load of learner legal 125s. See you then.